Hey there, this is Iron Designer here, and I just wanted to put together this video for those of you that conduct interviews like engineering managers, and really talk to you about what the core essential guidelines ought to be when you're doing an interview, because we do train managers to be better managers. And one of the weaknesses of most managers is the interview process. So stay tuned and let's talk about it. So one of the issues that most managers have is they've got the resume in front of them, and the first thing they want to start off with is, well, tell me about yourself, let's go through your resume. And this is really a very bad way to start an interview, because you're just asking the person to reiterate their resume back off the top of their head, and there's just no gain to the engineering manager to just rehash over ground that's already been covered. What we train our managers to do is put together your job description for the role that you're trying to fill, and from your job description develop an agenda for this discussion, because you as the manager have invited this person in to have a talk primarily about solving your needs, not their past experiences and how their past experiences are going to complement and fit into your current needs. But what you need is an agenda to figure out how a person could fit in and resolve your current agenda's issues. So you need to have bullet points regarding what your current status is going to be. Now, I hate to say this, but most managers just want to fill a box, and they just want to check a checkbox off on their checklist, and this is totally wrong. And most managers I've run into, they are not capable of completing the job task at hand, and therefore it is extremely difficult for them to fill a role that they themselves do not understand what the requirements and the capabilities need to be. Again, understanding your agenda and knowing exactly what the day-to-day tasks are going to be for this particular job role is going to help you to create a picture and a discussion story, basically, during the interview process for the exact role that you're trying to fill. One of the next problems that we see at Iron Designer when we are training managers is that managers are incorrectly under the assumption that they are out shopping for a pair of pants or a shirt or a screwdriver or a wrench. That's not the case when you're interviewing for a slot, a job position. You're not looking for someone that already has direct experience in that exact field. What you are really looking for is you're looking for a moldable piece of clay, and you're trying to make a determination as to whether this person that you're interviewing has the capability and the capacity to be molded. We have literally seen instances where a hiring manager wanted to fill a slot, for example, say in plastic molded injection position, and because the person had designed, say, plastic toys in the past at a company like Mattel or somewhere, and now he was applying for nearly the exact same identical plastic molded injection design engineering position, but say he was designing medical parts for medical devices, and the candidate was rejected because his past industrial experience didn't match exactly with the current industrial experience that he was applying for. What we told this hiring manager that he should have done is, why didn't he ask to what specifications or what industry standards the person was doing toy design and toy development on, And possibly could those industry standards for toy development, like an ISO standard, an ANSI standard, an ASME standard, other plastics, molded, injected, engineering design standards, could have been translated directly, almost word for word, into the medical devices, medical products design. And he then understood that, yes, I should have understood the relationship and not made a decision based on the industry separation. We have seen situations where the candidate maybe did not come up with the best analogy to describe his relational experience to the current need and the current demand. And simply because possibly that relational story that the candidate was explaining during the interview wasn't exactly what the engineering hiring manager had in mind, that should have been the response, again, the candidate was unfortunately rejected, but should not have been, just simply because potentially his example of trying to make an analogy between the two industries was slightly out of what the hiring manager's expectations really were. It's not always going to be the case that every candidate has the exact same industrial buzzwords nailed down that you as the hiring manager might be expecting for a person to be using a certain nomenclature, a certain vocabulary, certain buzzwords in their conversations, or hitting certain bullet points as they're having this interview conversation with you. As a hiring manager, you need to be able to read in between the lines. This is the difference between a hiring manager that is more a shallow perception during the interview process and a hiring manager that has a much more depth of relation to the person he is interviewing and can relate better using his ability to read in between the lines. People are going to have different experiences when they come into your office for an interview, and looking for someone with nearly identical experience to yourself is going to be a bit of a seeking of perfection. And rather than seeking perfection, what's more appropriate would be seeking moldability. And rather than trying to fit an exact square peg in an exact square hole, try to look for the round pegs. Try to look for the excellence that the person might be able to bring with them to the table, having a more diversity of experience, things outside of your comfort zone that would actually be a perfect match for what you're looking for. Another issue that we've seen during our observations of hiring managers has been when the hiring manager changes the subject of the interview too often. They change the direction of the interview too often. They ask for too many examples to be explained or justified or discussed. And the examples start branching out and splintering in many different directions. And they're expecting the candidate to handle these numerous fastballs that are being thrown their way. This can throw the candidate off. And it should not be the intention for the interviewing manager to intentionally try to throw off the candidate. Rather, it should be the intention of the hiring manager to try to dig out and verify what is internally within the candidate that could be refined and processed, rather than trying to look for any diamonds in the treasure box as it sits. It may not be a diamond just yet. It may be a diamond in the rough, but a hiring manager should try to look at their candidates a little deeper, thinking about how can I take the contents of this person and modify them to suit the needs and the requirements that we need today. As a hiring manager, a key element that you should have as one of your talents is the element of empathy and being able to put yourself now in the shoes of the person being interviewed. And it's easy to understand that maybe hiring managers may interview 20, 30, 40 people or more for a particular role. But the reason that they go through so many interviews is because they're failing to put themselves in the candidate's shoes. They're failing to see the moldability of the candidate, and they're failing to see how they can adapt, modify, and enhance the candidate's already existing capabilities to be one of their star employees on their team. In fact, a good hiring manager actually tries to help along the candidate through the interview process rather than having this confrontational, oppositional tactic. You should have a tactic more in leadership and mentorship during the interview. Try to play role reversal as a hiring manager. What would you say if that person were interviewing you? What if those questions that you're asking of the interviewee were asked upon you? What if the person that you invited into your office was there to interview you and introspect you and look at your talents, your flaws, your weaknesses, and your strengths? How would you be able to prevent being judgmental over the candidate during the interview process, being more empathetic and less concerned with how they either win you or lose you in a 5-second elevator conversation, but rather, how can you take this person long term? What can they do for you with the return on investment over a long period of time? If there's one thing that I hear over and over again from hiring managers is the response or even just initiating this conversation to the interviewee that, well, we'll get back to you. We've got dozens more candidates that we need to look at. And these interview processes sometimes take months. So, a conversation like that is really heartbreaking and depressing, really, for the interviewee. To hear things like that, like, wow, this person is going to make me wait a few months, and he's got another 24 interviews to go through before he can really evaluate and make a decision. It would be nice if he could tell me a lot sooner, exactly how he feels about me, my skills, my experiences, my talents, and what I can bring to the table. So what we recommend is try to close or bring the interview to a close on a positive note. Again, put yourself in the position of the interviewee. They're coming into this relationship from the weaker position, whereas the company and the corporation is in the stronger position, and they're willing to exchange labor and time for financial gain. So it's always good to try to end these interviews on a positive note, not just merely saying, well, do you have any questions for me? A lot of this stuff is a bit too canned and too standardized. Saying something like, well, I can really empathize with you. I know these interview processes are very complex, and we do all we can to bring as many people on board. Without raising anybody's hopes, you can say, well, I think the interview went very well. I'm very glad you came in today. It was nice meeting you, and I'm going to do everything I can to submit your application and feedback to human resources, and I wish you the best of luck. And so this is Iron Designer, and I hope this gave you some food for thought as the interviewer, how you can better handle an interview, how you can begin by thinking about the person as moldable and how they can fit into your resources and your team, how to close on a positive note, and how to make the entire interview process successful for everyone.